There is something about Indiana in the 1970s that people who lived through it carry with them forever. The Friday night lights at high school gyms, the smell of cornfields in August, the steady rhythm of factories that kept towns alive. And if someone grew up then, they know exactly what made that decade feel like home. This was a time when Indiana was the heart of American manufacturing. Steel mills in Gary lit up the night sky. Auto plants in Anderson and Kokomo employed entire communities. Farms stretched endlessly across the flat landscape, feeding the nation. And basketball was not just a sport, but a religion that unified the entire state. This was the decade that gave us the Indy 500 at its peak, small-town values, factory jobs that could support a family, and a pace of life that felt genuinely American. The turbulence of the 1960s was fading, but Indiana held on to something steady and familiar. Living in Indiana meant being part of the American heartland in the truest sense. Let's walk through what daily life actually felt like during that distinctive decade. Some of this might bring back memories. Some of it might explain why Hoosiers are so proud of where they came from. Let's step into that world. Homes in Indiana in the 1970s reflected the practical, unpretentious nature of the Midwest. Ranch houses and split levels dominated the suburbs of Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, and Evansville. These houses were affordable and built for families. A single factory income could buy a house, a car, and provide a comfortable life. Inside those homes, the aesthetic was unmistakably the 1970s. Harvest. Gold and avocado green appliances filled kitchens, shag carpeting in burnt orange and brown covered living room floors, wood paneling lined basement walls, creating family rooms where kids played and parents watched television together. The furniture was heavy and built to last, with earth tone upholstery and fake wood grain on everything. Basements were essential in Indiana, not just for family gatherings, but for tornado season. Every Hoosier knew the sound of tornado sirens and the drill of heading to the basement with a transistor radio to wait out the storm. Spring meant watching the sky turn green and knowing what that color meant. The seasons defined life in Indiana. Winters were harsh, with lake-effect snow in the northern part of the state and bitter cold everywhere. People plugged their cars in overnight using block heaters. Schools rarely closed for snow because Hoosiers knew how to handle it. Summer brought humidity that hung in the air and fireflies that lit up warm evenings. Fall meant football and harvest. The changing seasons gave the year its rhythm. The car culture in Indiana was practical rather than flashy. Big American sedans from Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler filled driveways. Station wagons carried families to church on Sundays and to grandma's house for dinner. Many of these cars were built right in Indiana, at factories where neighbors and family members worked the line. The energy crisis of 1973 hit Indiana hard. Gas prices spiked, and lines formed at gas stations. For a state where driving was the only way to get anywhere, expensive gas meant real hardship. Small towns had no public transportation, and people needed their cars for everything. The crisis pushed some Hoosiers toward smaller Japanese imports, though loyalty to American-made vehicles ran deep when your paycheck came from an auto plant. The Indianapolis 500 remained the biggest event of the year. Memorial Day weekend meant the race. Families gathered around televisions or made the pilgrimage to the speedway. The sound of engines, the tradition, the pageantry of it all made Hoosiers proud. Names like A.J. Foyt, Johnny Rutherford, and Gordon Johncock were heroes. The month of May in Indianapolis revolved entirely around the race. Before we continue with the culture and community that defined Indiana in this era, if you are enjoying this look back at how Hoosiers really lived and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how Americans built the lives we remember. Basketball in Indiana during the 1970s was more than a sport. It was identity. High school basketball drew entire communities together. Small towns with only a few hundred residents would pack gymnasiums with thousands of fans for Friday night games. The single-class tournament let tiny schools compete against urban powerhouses, And when a small town won, it became legend. The movie Hoosiers would later capture this spirit, but people who lived it knew the reality was just as dramatic. High school stars were local celebrities. College basketball at Indiana University under Bobby Knight was becoming dominant. The passion for the game connected farmers and factory workers, small towns, and cities. Factory work defined the Indiana economy. The steel mills of Gary and East Chicago employed tens of thousands. The air smelled of industry, and the sky glowed orange at night from the furnaces. These were hard jobs, dangerous work, but they paid well. A man could graduate high school, get a job at the mill, and provide for a family. Auto plants in Anderson, Kokomo, and Indianapolis assembled the cars America drove. Parts suppliers and related industries spread across the state. When the plants were running, Indiana prospered. When layoffs came, entire communities suffered. The connection between factory whistles and family dinners was direct and real. Farming remained central to Indiana life. The flat, fertile land produced corn and soybeans that fed the nation and the world. Farm families worked brutal hours during planting and harvest. Children helped with chores from a young age. The cycle of seasons and crops structured rural life completely. Small-town Indiana had a character all its own. Main streets had locally owned shops, hardware stores, and diners where everyone knew everyone. Friday nights meant high school football in the fall and basketball in the winter. Saturday nights might mean a movie at the single-screen theater downtown or cruising the main drag. Churches anchored communities. Sunday mornings meant services. Sunday afternoons meant family dinners. The social life of small towns revolved around church events, school activities, and community organizations. Neighbors helped neighbors. Doors were left unlocked. Children roamed freely and were expected home only when the streetlights came on. Television brought the outside world into Indiana homes. Families gathered to watch shows like All in the Family, MASH, and Happy Days. The nightly news delivered images from a changing world, but Indiana felt steady, removed from coastal turmoil. Music from the radio filled Indiana kitchens and cars. Rock and roll, country, and by mid-decade disco all had their audiences. John Mellencamp, still going by John Cougar, was a young man from Seymour, Indiana who would soon capture the spirit of small-town America in his songs. The music that would define the heartland was being born. Shopping meant going downtown or to the new malls appearing on the edges of cities. L.S. Ayres was the department store in Indianapolis, an institution where families bought school clothes and Christmas presents. Smaller towns had their own merchants, people who knew customers by name and would put items on layaway. Food was hearty and unpretentious. Pork tenderloin sandwiches, breaded and fried, bigger than the bun. Corn on the cob in summer, fresh from fields you could see from your backyard. Casseroles and covered dishes for church potlucks. Sugar cream pie, the official state pie for special occasions. Food was fuel for hard work, made with ingredients often grown locally. The 1970s brought challenges to Indiana. Inflation eroded buying power. The manufacturing economy faced early warnings of changes to come, but the decade also offered stability that would become harder to find. A factory job meant something. Communities held together. The values of hard work, faith, family, and neighborliness were not just words but lived reality. What defined Indiana in the 1970s was authenticity. This was not a place trying to be somewhere else. Hoosiers were proud of who they were, where they came from, and what they built. The pace was slower, the connections deeper, the expectations clearer. For those who lived in Indiana during the 1970s, it was a time when Friday nights meant something, when factories meant security, when communities meant neighbors who showed up when you needed them. The basketball gyms were packed, the cornfields stretched forever, and Indiana felt like the real America. For those with memories of this remarkable era in the Hoosier state, there is always more history to explore.